more people can join while we do that. But first of all, thank you for joining us for this Ridge to Rivers virtual meeting. We've been doing these for almost 2 years now, so hopefully we worked out some of the kinks. But my name is Bonnie Shelton. I help with communications and marketing for Boise Parks and Recreation, and under that umbrella is Ridge to Rivers and the partnership, which is led by the city of Boise. So I'll be your moderator for tonight. We really wanted to cover quite a few different topics. So we created a little bit of a different system for this meeting. Rather than just rapid fire throughout the hour, we asked users to send in questions to us. And we've also built in some very commonly asked questions that we've gotten throughout the pilot and kind of towards the end of this summer, so that hopefully our trail manager and some of our staff can answer those in a public forum. Just a reminder, we are recording this meeting as we like to post them on our website. So anyone that couldn't join us tonight can also watch that later on and get a lot of those frequently asked questions answered. We've had a great summer with this pilot program and some really great feedback from our users. So really, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's participated. This is our third survey that's currently going on right now. It'll be open until October 26th. And that's really the final phase of public engagement for this first ever pilot trail program that we're running here in the Boise foothills. And we're interested again to continue to see your feedback as that survey is open through next week. As a reminder, we will be covering a variety of topics, but I don't think we'll be able to get to everything tonight. So toward the end of the meeting, we should have some time for you to put some questions in the chat. You're also welcome to ask follow-up questions or interact in that chat feature during the meeting. And I'll try to pull some things from that I think are relevant. And our staff will also be tracking it and can follow up with you after the meeting if there's something that may take just a little bit longer to explain. But we're always available at Ridge to Rivers at cityofboise.org, and our website and our Facebook page, Ridge to Rivers, is honestly a great place to go if you want to connect with us at any time about the trails and trail management. So without further ado, before we dive into some questions, I just wanted to introduce our panelists of sorts for tonight. Sara Arkle is the Foothills and Open Space Superintendent for Boise Parks and Recreation. Hey, Sara. So she can talk about Ridge to Rivers and how that fits into the city of Boise and kind of some of our overall goals and programs. And then David Gordon, who I'm sure many of you know, is here as well. Thank you, David. David is our manager for the system. He has a ton of knowledge and obviously has been fielding a lot of questions from you all throughout this summer too. So he'll address a lot of the questions that we've been hearing tonight. And so we're going to start with a series of questions that were submitted by users prior to tonight's meeting. And once we get through some of those, like I said, we should have some time for additional questions from the chat. So feel free to put those there. So first, Sara, let's start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the Ridge to Rivers partnership, what it entails, and how trails in the Boise foothills are managed?
Sure, thanks, Bonnie. I'm excited to be here. I was looking through some of these questions that were submitted via email, and I was pretty impressed with the level of informed users that we have. Those questions are thoughtful, so I'm looking forward to diving into those tonight. The Ridge to Rivers partnership is an agreement. It's 5 agencies that came together in the early 90s with private property owners in the foothills to agree to try to collaboratively and cohesively manage a lot of trails across the foothills. And at that time in the early 90s, all of these trails weren't formally providing permanent access across private property, and each individual agency, which is the city of Boise, which leads the partnership, Ada County, Fish and Game, Idaho Fish and Game, the U.S. Forest Service, and U.S. BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. All of those land managers in the foothills had trails across their properties, but there was not really any collaboration to make it a seamless experience for users. And so in the 90s, some intrepid individuals came together and decided to agree to work together on managing those trails. And so about half of the property in the foothills that we see is publicly owned, and about another half is privately owned. And so the trails that you use, the Ridge to Rivers trails that you use, go across all of those agencies' properties and private land in a kind of mosaic pattern to provide this really cool amenity, over 200 miles of trails at this point, that we get to enjoy, for free every day.
Awesome. Thank you for that background. Just in case we have any new people on the call who weren't familiar with kind of the makeup of the Boise foothills, I think that's good background to provide. David, can you just give a little recap on the pilot program and how this all came about this summer?
Yeah, we've actually been trying to do something like this for a couple of years now, and COVID definitely put a hold on it. At the same time, it really made us realize how much we needed to kind of look at maybe some other management strategies on some of our busier trails in the foothills. 2021 we saw record numbers, 2 and 3 times higher in terms of overall use than we'd seen in the past. And a lot of new users and people that aren't familiar with the trail system, aren't familiar with trail etiquette, and just even if they are, crowded trails. And so we decided to come out to the public and ask a question that we'd asked a couple times in the past. Do you want to see some separation of use or some different management strategies on some of our busier trails? That was kind of the impetus for the pilot program, and we started by having a Zoom meeting last winter, followed by a survey that was, I think, over 4,000 respondents. And based on the feedback we got, we decided it was worth trying a pilot strategy program, and we selected 4 trails that seemed to make the most sense, and away we went. So we are in the 8th month of that 8-month pilot program right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned those 4 trails. I will say a lot of the questions submitted get a little nuanced on those trails. And the first one we're going to start with does that. So let's just jump right in. Related to the pilot program and testing a directional strategy on polecat, Nadine submitted a question asking, would it be possible to have polecat switch on odd and even days similar to Hulls Gulch? David, is that something that you can help address? Because I know we've gotten that from several users.
Yeah, that's actually the first time I've heard of that specific suggestion. It's an interesting one, to be honest with you. We have had a number of comments throughout the pilot period asking if we would switch directions. There's people that love riding or running polecat clockwise. There's others that like it counterclockwise. We chose counterclockwise for the pilot period, and we actually did check with people halfway through and said, do you want us to switch it up? The response that we got definitely led us to feel that we could stay the course through the 8-month program with going counterclockwise. But along those lines, we did offer a question, or we have a question out in the survey right now, asking, do you want to switch the trail on an annual basis, counterclockwise one year, clockwise the other, if people want to continue with the directional management strategy on that trail. To do it on a daily basis, that's another strategy that we didn't consider. The biggest challenge with that is the challenge that we found all along throughout this process is the education of people, trying to get people to understand what we're doing and to change their routines. We definitely had much more, I'm not going to say resistance, but a lot more people not doing the right thing when we started the program. Now we see many more people doing the right thing. I have 15 volunteer trail rangers out there, and they spend a lot of time on these pilot trails, and they give us feedback. Do you see everybody going the correct direction, as an example on polecat? And by and large, in the last few months, it's a rarer and rarer occurrence to have our rangers run across people going the wrong way. So we're trying to keep it simple. That's the one thing that we've learned is don't try to make it too difficult. Lower Hulls, the strategy there was probably harder for people to grasp because it is a day on and day off schedule. So I think right now we're comfortable with asking the question if people want a directional strategy to occur, would you like to see it switch year to year?
And I know we've gotten a couple other questions submitted in the last week or so that also mentioned maybe mornings are a certain direction or multi-use and then switching it to directional in the afternoon. Is that something that would be considered potentially maybe in the future if there is better education and, following the rules, should this be made permanent, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I wouldn't throw anything off the table in the future, but I would say that talking with other areas that have tried similar strategies, and by our own experience, right back to what I just mentioned, you got to keep it simple. Without a doubt, all of our trails are less used at 6 a.m. on a summer morning. When it's light enough and you can be out there, and it's arguably not as important to separate use at those times, but to try to meet all of those different time frames, it's just too confusing for people to grasp. And we've seen that when we have tried restrictions at Table Rock in the winter, when we said stay off of those trails after 10 a.m. as an example, because they soften up and become muddy. We'll have people look at their watch and go, well, it's 9:55, and then they'll leave for an hour and a half long hike. So same thing could apply here. If it's before a certain hour and someone thinks, well, I've got a couple minutes before 8, I can go, and you have someone come in the opposite direction and thinking it's 5 minutes after 8, I'm not going to run into someone. It's just, it doesn't work. You got to keep it fairly simple and straightforward.
And I see Barbara, who's joining us tonight, made a comment in the chat. Either direction on Polecat still prevents use by out and back hikers. Is that something that went into the thought process on Polecat Loop in general, making that directional? And what have you heard when you're out on the trails?
Yeah, that was something people pointed out right as we were about to start the strategy. And so we originally, the directional component at Polecat was going to be the entire loop. We heard people and listened to folks that said, we would like an out and back option. So that's why Polecat Loop is actually both directions, from the trailhead all the way up to the Quick Draw junction. And from Quick Draw, you can continue on up Quick Draw and along Doe Ridge. And so you actually can go out and back via those trails, or you can make a shorter loop by utilizing those trails. So I think we did listen to people and provided that option.
Jumping to the next topic, we got a question submitted by Patty that said, why have you decided to limit the use and directionality of the trails in this pilot instead of enforcing trail etiquette?
Yeah, it's comes down to a couple of things. One, you can't enforce trail etiquette, and myself and my staff don't have enforcement capabilities. We have always tried, and we continue to try via our staff and via our volunteer trail rangers and every means possible to try to educate trail users as to proper trail etiquette, and we'll continue to do so. But in the face of so much use on narrow single track trails, you have to start looking at some other options. And so that was, and you don't need to employ them on every single trail. So that's why we chose a handful of trails where this made sense and said, let's take another step. Let's try some management strategies that might improve people's experience and see if it works. And then come back and ask people, is this something that you want to see long-term, or does it, do you not?
Sara, do you have any additional thoughts on that, just kind of from your work with the city of Boise and kind of the overall educational efforts related to trail etiquette and things like that from your experience?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is, just to get an idea of scale of use, we've seen increase in use, year over year over year. And in 2015, I believe it was, or no, excuse me, 2016, when we did our open space reserves management plan, and then in the 10-year Ridge to Rivers management plan, we were estimating use at about 1 million visits a year on our trail system. And that's based on some data that we had from trailhead surveys, and then also some pedestrian and bike counters that we were able to utilize their estimates. The same strategies indicated that use had tripled in some cases. And so in 2021, we jumped from, maybe estimating 1 million visits to our trail system to 3 million visits. And so, this has been thoughtfully done with the opportunity for folks to participate in every step of the process since 2016, when we first started asking this question. And to David's point about keeping it simple, we've asked folks in 2016 and 2018, do you want to try different management strategies? do you want to see some separation of use? And at those times, folks were like, no way, it's too confusing. We don't want to do that. We like our multi-use system. And so 2021 was the first time when we really saw people pivoting and wanting us to try something different. So we're all learning. We're trying to teach trail users new things on the trails that they're, really, really connected to. And we're learning new management strategies and how to implement them. So I guess that's all I have to add.
No, thank you. That was helpful. We've definitely received some feedback on the pilot program signage. You mentioned we're learning. We did receive a question, is this something that can be tweaked or changed if any of the pilot program changes become permanent? I think this one was specifically related to Hulls Gulch.
Yeah, and it was a learning process, and it continues to be. We definitely went back and tweaked the signage on Lower Hulls Gulch, I think 3 or 4 different times, and it needed it. It's much clearer now. But again, if any of these go permanent, yes, we're going to modify the signage a bit again, just to try to make them as clear as possible, for sure. That's definitely our goal.
Yeah, I will say we appreciate users' feedback, and we've gotten both sides. It's clear as day, and this is super confusing. So that is something that David and our team will work together on if any of these, as he mentioned, become permanent. But we appreciate the users that have reached out to us and offered some different ideas, because it's a change and it's different. And if you're a new user and you approach that sign, you got to read through it and understand and then know what day it is. So we'll definitely look to make some changes if these become permanent. Staying on the topic of Hulls Gulch, we've received a couple questions about that particular management strategy and kind of the even odd day configuration. So this is more of a combo question from Liz, and she asks, what do you plan to do about the bike overcrowding around Lower Hulls on even days or the days when it's open to hikers? And why are bikes allowed uphill on even days on Hulls if pedestrians can't be on Hulls on odd days?
Actually, by all my observations and our my staff's observations, our rangers' observations, we don't see a lot of bike crowding on Lower Hulls. I think it's lessened significantly with this program. That's been the goal. One of the goals of the program is to try to lessen the traffic on that trail on any given day. With respect to, it's a good question. Why are bikes allowed on even days? And it was simply the concern that I've always heard from hikers and trail runners or non-cyclists have 100% of the time have been with respect to cyclists coming down at them or coming down behind them or coming at a blind corner down toward them. In 30 plus years of trail management, I've yet to hear from someone that said, I'm so upset with these cyclists that come up behind me and want to pass me, because they generally are not moving much faster than a hiker. So that's not the issue. When you talk about biker-hiker confrontations, it's really centers on the downhill rider encountering anyone else going uphill, whether it's an uphill rider or a hiker or a runner or those people going downhill as well. So that's why we looked at, we wanted to be able to continue to provide the opportunity for cyclists that enjoy going up that trail. And we felt that by doing that on the hiking days, it would not be too impactful to the folks that are using the trail on foot or on horse.
Thanks for explaining that, because I think that has been something that people have been curious about throughout this process. Another question for you, David. Rick asks, Lower Hulls is one of the few trails with elevation that is available to responsible uses when conditions are muddy. Do you think that pushing users off Lower Hulls when conditions are muddy based on the alternating days plan will negatively impact other trails?
I certainly share the concern. We're going to try hard. We do our daily trail condition reports, and we're going to try, if this goes permanent, and I want to predicate every answer with that. If this goes permanent, it's going to be incumbent on us in our daily trail condition reports to let people know what day of the week it is for that trail, because it is one that we've often pushed people toward when conditions are poor on other trails. I'm hoping that this is a time where people will take advantage of the all-weather trails that we have, that we've created out in the foothills. We do hope to add some more next year in military reserve. And also, there are other options out there besides Lower Hulls Gulch, and it's and besides the all-weather trails, there are some other sandy trails. And so someone is going to have to be maybe a little more creative if it isn't their day for Lower Hulls Gulch. If it's a downhill cycling day and you want to hike it and it's a day where conditions are marginal, I agree, it may be a little bit of a challenge, but we'll do our best on our end with the daily reports and to try to give people those options.
And Andrew, I see your question in the chat and we're getting to that right now. So we've talked a lot about the pilot program and answered some questions there. We also received some questions related to how final decisions will be made about these pilot program changes, specifically to polecat and holes. Can you talk a little bit about, will it be contingent on the results of this final survey that's going on now that we've mentioned here tonight, or how will those decisions be made? And David, maybe you start, and I'd love to hear from you, Sara, as well.
Yeah, honestly, let me just say, as a trail system manager, I'm just glad we had a chance to do this the past 8 months. It doesn't matter to me how we go forward. I wanted, and I don't think it matters to any of us. We want to do what everybody feels like is going to be the best experience for them on the trails. And so that's why we keep coming back to the public and asking them that. If we're talking about decisions that are real resource related decisions, then we're going to rely more on a lot of professional expertise and judgment. But when we're talking about different trail management strategies to improve experience, we want to know, is it improving the experience for you? And if it is, great. If it's not, we'll do something different, or we'll go back to the way it was. So in order, in terms of how we're going to decide that once the survey is done, the survey is going to be key in determining it. But thankfully, we are going to be working with a statistician who specializes in surveys and who also happens to be an avid trail user. And he's amazing. He combs out things that we have, that I can tell you that I don't comb out of those surveys. And we are going to rely heavily on his analyzing the results and his input for us.
Yeah, I would just add it all of, we've tried to do what we can to make everything really transparent. We've provided all of the data that we've received, all of the analysis that we've done to that data to come to some decision making on this pilot program. And every step of the way, we have kept not only our users informed, or tried to keep our users informed, we also try to keep City Council informed and our partners informed. And so we have to make sure that like we're all linked up, as we're moving forward with this question as to whether or not these pilot strategies will become permanent. And just to talk a little bit about the word permanent, I don't want folks to think that, the survey comes out, there's, favorable numbers to indicate people like certain things, and we're going to continue with them on a permanent basis. That permanent means that a brick wall comes down and we're never going to ask you again if you like this or don't like it. The whole point of this program and having tools like this really is to continue to have dialogue with trail users in person and virtually in any way that we can, to make sure that we are staying kind of up to date with users' expectations and staying thoughtful about how we can create a safe and accessible trail system for everyone.
And I want to get to a couple things in the chat before we move on outside of pilot program stuff, because we did also get some questions just in general trail management and trail use realms. But first, Deanne commented, and we've heard this from some users, that it seems like bikers are getting the opportunity to use lower holes more often than hikers. Sara, maybe you can take some time to talk a little bit about kind of the management strategy there and just the thought that went into some of these things. And David, if you have some thoughts too, I'd love for you to chime in.
Well, the first thing I would go back to is sort of like, what do we know about our users? And we've done multiple surveys over the last 6 years to help us understand who's using the trails, how they're using the trails, and looked across the country, frankly, to understand trail use trends and where we expect Boise foothills to, grow, how we expect the use in Boise foothills to grow. Right now, we have, I think, a little over half of our general users, and these are broad numbers, so please don't, quote me necessarily, but a little over half of our users are on foot, and that's runners and that's walkers. But bike usage is growing. And so there's also an expectation from our users that we're going to provide the experience that all users want to see. And Lower Holes Gulch, and I know David can talk about this, for a long time because we've talked about it a lot. Lower Holes Gulch is like everyone's favorite trail. So we tried to find a way to sort of, provide equal opportunity to people across our user group, profile at this location. And that's why we didn't make it directional. And that's why you didn't ask us to make it directional. I mean, a lot of what we're doing here, all of what we're doing here is based on the feedback that we received in the first survey. So I think we're trying to do our best to provide equal opportunities for access for all users, with an understanding that our user group is changing all the time. And so we try to do our best to make sure that we're understanding how that change occurs and responding to it.
Anything to add, David, or did that cover it?
I would just add that, to keep in mind the goal of what we're doing there in Lower Holes Gulch and on all those trails is to improve user experience. And it shouldn't be hikers against bikers, us against them thing. And are we getting the same thing that the other group is? What we're trying to do is provide an improved user experience by trying these strategies. And, to that end, uphill riders going along with people on foot, it does not, it doesn't really seem to be something that detracts significantly from someone's user experience. Conversely, downhill riders have there's a lot of potential for a downhill rider to detract from another user's experience. And so that was the goal with Lower Holes Gulch.
And one kind of forward-thinking question that kind of lends to if another pilot will potentially happen in the future. Daryl asked, depending on what happens, can bobs potentially be included in directional days?
Yeah, so again, I want to say one other thing.
Oh yeah, go for it.
And it was just a thought that I had. We're also trying to provide that, I keep talking, I want to make sure that people have a good experience on foot and don't run into downhill cyclists. But at the same time, the other half of this equation is we're trying to provide an opportunity for cyclists to have a downhill experience where they're not concerned about running into somebody. And so that's the other half of that coin when it comes to Lower Holes Gulch. That's important to remember. With respect to bobs, so we've had people ask about a number of trails. Can we do directional on this trail, or could we do odd even day? And yes, you could certainly employ those strategies on other trails, but I think what we have to consider is the amount of use that's on a trail. A trail like Bob's doesn't receive, a tenth of the use that a trail like Lower Holes does, and that was the reason that we looked at trying to employ the strategy on Lower Holes. It has a lot of use and a lot of potential for conflict. Bob's is similar in that it certainly winds along the bottom and has limited visibility, but the use doesn't warrant trying to put in some of these restrictions that then restrict people's ability to use them on any given day. And I think still our overall goal is to provide a multi-use trail experience where people can, by and large, use any trail they want on any day they want. And I think we really want to be selective about which trails that we employ management strategies on that start to limit that.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for, we just got another question in the chat. I may get to that in a minute after we transition a little bit, but please, if you do have questions or clarifying items, you're welcome to put them in the chat and I'll help moderate those. We want to move on since we're about halfway through the meeting. to some topics that are just overall trail management and use. We've gotten some additional questions submitted. So Sarah, Will submitted feedback and a question related to muddy trails, and I'd love for you to tackle this one. He asks in part, what, if any, plans does Ridge to Rivers have to increase user education and outreach about muddy trails and proper trail use? Could the city of Boise be persuaded to increase Ridge to Rivers' budget to hire additional staff to serve this purpose? Can you please help answer that question?
I will do my best. Hopefully David will chime in because this is a big one. You know, to be honest, this problem isn't something that could be solved with 2 more people, 3 more people, 10 more people. We have been fortunate in that our trail user group has been fairly responsible over the years to, you know, educate themselves and know when they should and shouldn't be on trails. And we have done, I think, a lot. I think David's done a great job and his team has done a great job working with you, Bonnie, working with local media outlets, trying to make sure that the information is out there for folks, that they can go onto the Facebook page the morning of their hike and get a daily trail report during those times of the season when it might be wet. We're going to continue to do all that and continue to find additional ways to try and do outreach and educate users. We tried to enforce a pilot trail closure program on Table Rock. I think that started in 2018. And unfortunately, it wasn't successful. I mean, we went to, and I think David can speak to this, we went to the kind of extent of going out on an hourly basis, depending on the conditions and opening and closing gates. And frankly, you know, folks who wanted to be out there, when they wanted to be out there, went regardless of whether or not the gate was open or closed. And so I think the next step, which is honestly kind of a last resort for us, is to think about area closures and having those closures be enforceable. The Parks Department can close parks. So you remember when we were experiencing some extreme flooding in the Greenbelt due to snowpocalypse in 2016. We were able to close some parks and work with our county clerk or city clerk's office to have that be enforceable. So that is a tool in the toolbox. But we're fully aware that accessibility is like a part of our identity here. And so we don't want to have to close those places if we can continue to educate. But it is something that we are looking at and something that we are trying to set ourselves up to be able to do.
Yeah.
Wait, one more thought. I'm sorry. I just want to remind folks, we don't own all the land. So the city of Boise has trailheads and trails, and we could close some of those trailheads or we could close some of those trails. But again, there's 4 other agencies that own property in the foothills that trails are on. And so we can't make sort of a broad brush decision. We don't get to do that, you know. And closures for the federal government are a lot harder to accomplish.
I would just say, you know, the challenge with our system that is also the benefit of our system. We've got hundreds of access points into our trail system. So it's really, you know, which is wonderful when you want to go out and use the trails, right? But it's makes it very difficult to actually close trails effectively. You know, we tried that with Table Rock, and we put up 3 gates at the primary access points, but there's numerous other access points we just could not cover and we couldn't feasibly gate. And we did, honestly, we had people, I would have staff there asking people, telling them that the trail is closed today, and they would walk by our staff, climb over the gate and go up the trail anyway. So it's pretty disheartening. What it comes down to, it's not so much a lot more funding. It comes down to my feeling, to all of us as a community of trail users. We all have to be responsible and do our part to really push this message across to everybody else that we recreate with and to other trail users, you know, in a positive way. But trying to get that message across that using trails when they're muddy it's not acceptable here, and it is acceptable in other locations that have different soil types, and so that's part of the challenge. We have a lot of new people moving in here, and they go, "What do you mean? I always did that where I came from." It's an educational process that we'll continue to work on, but it takes a community to manage our trail system, and this is, you know, really the case in point.
Yeah, you mentioned that community, and Jill just put a note in the chat and a question. On another note, when volunteering for Ridge to Rivers, there's often a wait list to be a volunteer ranger or to adopt a trail, which if more miles are added to the system in the future, why is there not an increase in volunteers? And I know, especially since COVID, we have had such a huge increase in people wanting to get on the trails and work on them. David, can you talk just a little bit about that process and the management of it, and how we try to work with people to get on the trails and have those opportunities?
Yeah, we will probably set a record this year in terms of volunteer hours. We have groups contacting us all the time, wanting to help, which is great. And we do our very best to be able to accommodate them. You don't always have a trail project that works for volunteer groups. And so part of the challenge on our part is, seeing, is there a project there that's going to work for volunteers? But we really do our best to accommodate groups that want to go out in the foothills and help. With respect to our Trail Ranger program, you can only, this does come down to budget. You can only manage so many people. And we have 15, sometimes 16 or 17 volunteer trail rangers. And that's a lot for one half-time staff to wrangle, a lot of folks. And so that is why we feel, we have to cap that program at that level. In our adopted trail program, not every trail really works for an adopted trail. You have to have a trail that's relatively accessible and is maintained by hand. A lot of our trails have gotten wider and wider in the foothills just due to the amount of use that we get, the soils that we have, and the sparse vegetation that we have adjacent to those soils. And as those trails get wider, it really becomes ineffective to maintain them by hand. If you have an adoptee group, obviously they're going to be maintaining them by hand. So we maintain more of our trails now with very small mini excavators. We can do a much nicer job providing a good trail tread when the trails get wider. So that's why we don't just keep adding more and more adoptee groups. We have to. There's only there's a limited number of trails that really work for an adopted trail. But we do let people know if there's not an adopted trail for them. There might be a volunteer project that they could undertake. Case in point, we've had groups helping us this summer to build the Heroes Trail, to build a reroute on Cartwright Ridge just in the last few weeks, to extend the Barn Owl Trail, and those are awesome. I mean, these groups that came out did a fantastic job. So and they liked it. We like working with them. So again, we have groups pulling fencing from the foothills. We do our best to really try to accommodate groups.
Bonnie, can I just hop in and make a quick suggestion?
Yeah.
Just because it's fantastic and awesome that folks want to volunteer and help out. And even if there isn't an organized volunteer opportunity, there's nothing to prevent anybody from being a good trail steward, taking it upon yourself to take an extra bag with you and pick up trash, or unfortunately pick up dog poop. Or just be a happy trail ambassador, take the pledge, be welcoming. I mean, these things matter almost as much, if not more, than participating in an organized volunteer event, helping to set the tone every day out there and be an example for other trail users.
Thank you. And thanks for that question, Jill. Another question for you, Sarah. That was submitted by a user regarding dogs in the foothills. And they asked about the potential for, I know we hear a lot about dogs, pro and con. They asked about the potential for fining dog owners who don't pick up after their pet. You mentioned the whole dog poop thing, or follow rules related to on leash, etc. Is the partnership planning to make any changes in that arena?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I know it can be really frustrating for trail users to experience waste on the trails. It's a complicated one too, because like I mentioned, there's multiple jurisdictions across the foothills. So the city of Boise has an ordinance that requires folks to have their dogs on leash in trailheads. And that is enforceable. And we do have animal enforcement officers that go across our park system, including the trailheads, to educate and enforce that ordinance. You can't really you'd have to have an officer there watching the animal do its business and know who the owner is to be able to cite them. And so that combination is actually kind of difficult. And in addition to that, we have to go through Ada County Prosecutor's Office for any sort of citations. And so that's why if you're a user of the parks and you've been cited for having your dog off leash, you'll be shocked that it's over $80. And so we're trying to balance, again, this like enforcement versus education or only education. In this case, David and I are looking at and investigating an option where we may be able to require people to continue to have their dogs on leash 200 feet into the trail. That's kind of an easier thing to enforce. And most dogs, are doing their business within that, area. So it's close to trash cans. We try and provide mutt mitts. We try to make it easy for people. And I think over the last 5 years, we've added, I don't know how many trash cans to the system and how many mutt mitts. But, we're trying to do what we can and what we can affect on our end to make it easy for people to do the right thing. And we're just going to have to continue to educate and provide those opportunities and make those changes where.
Thanks, Sarah. And just a reminder to everyone watching, we are pulling questions from the chat, and we have just about 15 minutes left, a little bit more than that. So if you have anything that hasn't been covered, please feel free to use that feature. There's a couple in there that I'll get to after this last one that was submitted before this meeting tonight. And it's a doozy. It's a topic that we've been hearing a lot about, but I think is important for trail users to hear from our team on, and that is e-bikes. So David, can you speak to current rules related to e-bikes? And Sarah, if you want to jump in after too, because I know this is something that we discuss a lot, and why only certain trails in the system allow them, and just kind of where things stand right now related to e-bikes in the Boise foothills.
Yeah, and before I address it, I would encourage you to, because it's a lot, and to digest it most easily, go to our website and ridgetorivers.org, and then click under motorized users, and there's a very lengthy but good description of where you can and cannot ride an e-bike. Briefly, again, as Sarah mentioned early on, the foothills are a real patchwork, and our trail system is a real patchwork of ownerships. A lot of our trails are on Forest Service, a lot of our trails are on BLM, and right now both federal agencies consider e-bikes a motorized vehicle. So we only have in our system 2 motorized trails. Those trails are obviously open to not only motorcycles, but to an e-bike. But if it's a non-motorized trail on federal land or on state fish and game land, it's considered, an e-bike is not allowed because it's considered a motorized vehicle. The city has, the city and the county has a few trails that are open to e-bikes. But the city and the county hold a number of revocable easements for trails that we manage that are on private land. Those are all for non-motorized use as well. So that really limits where an e-bike can legally ride in the foothills. The city has identified a number of trails that that are 100% on their property, and those trails are open to someone who has come into the Parks and Rec office in Ann Morrison Park, and you can come in and say, I would like a sticker for my e-bike because I need it from an accessible standpoint. And you can get that sticker, put that on your bike, and they will give you a map and a list of those trails that you can ride legally. So that's one avenue if you're a person that really needs it from an accessibility standpoint. Both of our federal land management agencies, BLM and Forest Service, are supposed to undertake studies at the local level nationwide to determine whether they want to change non-motorized designations on trails to allow for e-bikes. And we in Boise are waiting for our local federal agencies to start those studies. I do not know when that's going to occur. So until that does, they're not allowed on much of our trail system. And what these decisions occur not at the Ridge to Rivers level, but at levels higher up, and then we will just implement them as directed on the trails on these different jurisdictions. So it is a bit confusing. We have signs all over our trail system that explain where e-bikes are allowed, where they're not allowed. And I'll be honest, it's a challenge. People tend to tear them down, and that's very frustrating for us. People that I assume are pro e-bike are tearing them down on a regular basis, and that's costing us money. It pulls us away from working on our trails. And that kind of stuff needs to stop. People need to be patient and just let the process begin, or reach out to the local land managers and ask, try to get some more information. I encourage people to do
that. If I may add a few things. E-bikes are considered an accessibility device. And we are, wanting to provide accessible options for outdoor recreation. It's good for everyone. And those disabilities aren't always visual. And so if you are on the trails and you see someone riding an e-bike, with or without the sticker, they may have a disability that you'll never know about. And so, to David's point of being patient, I think it's really important that folks give each other grace out there on the trail system. If you're an individual who needs a mobility assistance device indoors, you can utilize your e-bike or your hand bike anywhere, frankly, because that's the benefits of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think, as we try and find opportunities to provide accessible options for people in the foothills, it's very difficult, simply because of the terrain and, all the different, like we've been talking about, ownerships. So just at the end of the day, we're doing our best to try and respond to the requirements that municipalities have to provide accessibility, the expectations of users, and this very unique, very cool partnership that we have with all of these agencies.
I want to pull a couple questions from the chat because we are getting close to time. One of them is about new trails. Chris wrote this. How about adding some new trails to the east side of the foothills, considering all the growth that is going on out there with Harris Ranch and other new subdivisions?
I'll go ahead and jump in on that one if you don't mind. Thanks for the question, Chris. I get that question a lot. And going back to land ownership, the eastern portion of the foothills is generally owned by two primary landowners, one of which is private and the other is Fish and Game. We are trying to work with some of the smaller developments to provide opportunities for trail easements in the future. But right now, we don't have the ability to make those large connections you might want across from Homestead over to Table Rock, for example, because we don't have the approval of the private landowner. And Fish and Game is constitutionally bound to not put any new trails. We're fortunate in that we have this beautiful wildlife management area, the Boise River Wildlife Management Area, where, animals, big game and other animals, that area is protected for them. In order to make sure that, my kid and hopefully his kid one day will continue to have these really neat interactions with wildlife in the foothills. But, they are constrained and we have to work within that constraint. So maybe the situation one day will change with some of those private landowners. And I think our job is just to set ourselves up so that if the situation changes, we can take advantage and make some of those connections that we know people want.
Any addition to that, David, or did that cover it for you?
I think that covers it very well.
Okay. The last comment that I'm seeing, I think should close us out. And this definitely speaks to, especially with the pilot program and kind of that almost like hikers versus cyclists mentality that I think often gets brought up when it comes to the foothills. Sarah, you've mentioned kind of trying to meet everyone's experience expectation with these shared use trails. Barbara asked, is the predicted usage in cyclists going to drive your planning? Sorry, I wanted to make sure I read that right. Is the predicted usage in cyclists going to drive your planning, Or would you also consider encouraging more usage by all Boiseans, including families, on the trails?
That's a great question. Our planning is going to be driven by our users. And what we'll try to do is continue to ask people what they want. And I don't want there to be this, again, versus sort of bikes versus hikers versus families. I mean, I'm all of those things. And many users experience the foothills on their bike, on their feet, with their families. We want to encourage use because we want people to experience the benefits of outdoor recreation. There's mental and physical benefits to being outside that benefit us in ways that we aren't really able to track, right? There's community health benefits, there's education benefits. So I would love to see more families on the trails. I'd love to see, more people of color on the trails. I'd love to see more folks with disabilities on the trails, because being outdoors and experiencing these things, especially an opportunity like this that is free, makes us more whole as a community. So our planning is really, to provide opportunities for everyone to get those benefits.
David, any parting words?
And their horse. I see
Yes.
you, Jill.
Thanks, Jill.
No, I mean, I think Sarah hit it on the head. We want it to be inclusive. We want everyone to enjoy the trails. And the only thing I would add, the question asked, will the possibly projected increase in bikes drive management decisions? I hope that if we're doing our job correctly, any change in trails should help drive our management decisions. We should be looking at what's happening on our trails all the time, and trying to have those things and what's happening on other systems that are like ours, and using those as tools to drive our management decisions so that we're providing the best opportunity we can for people.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Sarah. And I don't see any more comments, but I just want to say thank you to everyone that joined us tonight. You shared some really great questions and feedback that we are listening to, and obviously will inform how this pilot program, and honestly the foothills in general, move forward. We've always had great participation from people. And again, if you want to reach out to us and our team, David and trail managers and all of that, ridge2rivers@cityofboise.org is the best website to do that. We monitor it daily and really make sure to get back to people and answer their questions. It's a great resource. And as David mentioned earlier, we have a ton of information on ridge2rivers.org about e-bikes, about usage. We post fall weather hikes and rides that are great when the leaves are changing, spring hikes in the foothills. David and his team have a ton of experience. And as was mentioned, there's volunteer opportunities, but our community is awesome. So a lot of people want to get involved. And I would just want to plug, we have this survey that's kind of the final phase of this pilot program that continues until October 26th. We're going to continue communicating about it. If you haven't taken the Happy Trails Pledge and joined our information list that we send emails to probably quarterly, it's not too many in your inbox, I'd encourage you to do that, because it's a great way to stay involved and learn about things that are happening. And then we will, of course, continue to communicate with users as this process moves forward. Once the survey closes and we gather data back from the statistician that David mentioned, we're definitely going to continue being transparent, posting all of the feedback and results on our website, ridge2rivers.org, again, in case you missed it. But we really do want to make sure that our users stay informed, because we feel like we've had such great response. I think Sarah and David would agree. People care about the trails and how they're managed, and they're such a jewel in this community. So we really want to make sure that any changes that are made are good ones that people want to see. So thank you again for joining us tonight. We appreciate your feedback. Please take the survey. It's linked in the chat if that's an easy way for you to click and take it. Otherwise, we'll give you 5 minutes back in your evening. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, David.